I wonder how important you see the issue of mass immigration in our vulnerability to the vicissitudes in the price and supply of fossil fuel.
Yes, it's negligible. It's infinitesimal. The most important factor is, as I'm sure Kelly would support me, is what the Department of Energy calls the motorization rate. This is the number of vehicles per thousand population. When you go from 0 vehicles to 1 vehicle, and from 0 to 10, and 0 to 100, and 0 to 1,000, that's the most significant factor in terms of petroleum consumption. Not in terms of other resources, for example, food or water, then population might matter. But when you're talking about petroleum consumption, the most significant factor is the number of vehicles per thousand population. The United States has approximately 775 vehicles per thousand population. Think about that. That's, if you exclude children and the very elderly who can't drive, that's 1 vehicle per person in this country. That's how you get 225 million vehicles in a country of 300 million people. And when you add up the number of gallons per week or year that those 220 million vehicles consume, that's why we consume 1/4 of the world's petroleum. Now China, which has approximately 20, maybe it's higher now, maybe you could tell me, Kelly, per 1,000 vehicles, consumes much smaller amount of petroleum. It does have a larger population, so that does matter. But until they approximate our level of motorization rate, it's not going to have nearly as significant as an impact. So petroleum consumption is largely a product of affluence and transportation dependence on individual vehicles. As I say, this is not true of other resources. Water, food is more closely associated with per capita, but not petroleum.
In the last few years, a state-run Chinese oil company attempted a peaceful takeover of an American oil company, Unocal, through the equities markets. The attempt failed. Chevron ended up with them. I'd like you to discuss a little bit the background behind how the Unocal takeover by the Chinese company failed, and what China might have learned from this experience.
Well, this was a product of intervention by the U.S. Congress into the free trade arena, and it was led by proponents of free trade. That is, the Republican free trade proponents in Congress sabotaged their own capitalist free trade principles. It was led by Representative Pombo, who, as you may know, is fighting for his career now. He's been tied to the Abrahamhoff scandal. He is the man who has received the highest amount of campaign finance from the oil industry. His district includes Chevron. He's gotten more campaign finance contributions from the oil industry than any other member of Congress. He is the chairman of the House Resources Committee. He introduced a amendment to the Energy Policy Act of 2005, which said that any purchase of a major energy resource owned by an American company should be subjected to intensive scrutiny for possible national security implications, and that this should take 180 days, or was it longer than that, 6 months, and this essentially sabotaged CNOOC's purchase. So this was state intervention in a free trade operation. I don't know if that answers your question. What China learned from this is that the United States does not believe in free trade when it comes to energy. That energy has been securitized and is a source of competition between the U.S. and China, and that China has got to prepare to engage in warfare with the United States or warfare by other means when it comes to energy. I think the net effect of this is to push China into closer alliance with Russia to form some kind of geopolitical, military, energy, strategic alliance with Russia. The most immediate consequence of this was for China and Russia to bolster the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which met shortly afterwards in the months since, which has called for the United States to vacate its bases in Central Asia and to push the United States out of Central Asia, a stronger anti-American stance in Asia. So I see it. Of course, I see things in a pessimistic way. You'll have to accept that from me. I should say that by way of warning. That the Chinese have come to see that free trade operates but not when it comes to energy. That energy is different. That energy is a source of conflict between the U.S. and China, will become more so in the years ahead, as I've explained, and that China will have to prepare to develop a geopolitical strategy to protect its interests in a conflictive mode with the United States, and everything that Hu Jintao has done since then is consistent with that.
One in what's called the great game in Central Asia in terms of control over the energy there. Would you sort of give a scorecard on, are we winning or are we losing? And the second question would be about Iran. I think that that our military and foreign policy efforts there are to try to keep Iran from setting up a long-term energy relationship between India and Pakistan, and in China has a lot more to do with that than does nuclear power. So if you would articulate some on the situation with Iran and energy and the United States.
I would say that George Bush won one, and that right now it's a draw. George Bush won one enormous stroke in May when he traveled to India and offered India a uranium nuclear deal with the Indians, whereby the United States recognized their nuclear weapons program, and their nuclear program, the quid pro quo was that India would more or less drop its plans to rely on Iran for natural gas. In return, the United States will begin to supply India's nuclear power industry with uranium, which will allow India, which has a limited supply of uranium, to use that to make bombs, so that India can now accelerate its production of nuclear bombs so that it will be a greater threat to China. So this was, in my view, a form moving towards a U.S.-India anti-Chinese alliance, except India has to give up which they want, in return for dropping the Iran pipeline, natural gas pipeline. So that was a plus for the U.S., but they're losing in Central Asia because, as I answered the last question, the Russia-China alliance and through the SCO and their ties to Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan are growing stronger and the U.S. weaker.
This regarding your mentioning of lack of leaping of leapfrogging. I'm sorry, leapfrogging of Chinese automakers in advanced technology and fuel efficiency technology. I understand your study only cover these 3 joint ventures with American Big Three, and given what they are doing in their home field, it's understandable. You don't see a lot of progress there. Do you have any observation on other indigenous, Chinese automaker like Chery, Geely, and Brilliance Auto, how they're doing? And, or do you have any plan to conduct studies for them?
I haven't done nearly as detailed work on those companies. I have been to Geely's factory. I'd characterize Chinese capabilities, technological capabilities in vehicle technology, including those indigenous companies, to be lacking. They are significantly behind by their own admission. What those companies are doing is trying to reach out to international consultants from different countries to sort of bring them the components of the knowledge that they need. So they're just using a very different strategy rather than forming joint ventures to acquire the technological know-how. They're reaching out and trying to find people to come work for them to do that.